very much for this warm welcome. It means a lot to me to come back here, actually, to Arizona. I do wish, of course, to thank all those responsible for inviting me. Professor Laura Hollengreen, who's really kind of the head of the whole endeavor. As you've mentioned, committees, faculty, and so forth. And of course, Kathy McGuire, who's been the most incredible hostess, really. And it's around our shared admiration for Judith Chaffee as an architect. I'd like to dedicate this talk to the memory of Judith Chaffee. Because, among other things, Judith was an architect with a profound understanding of light and shadow in architecture, and therefore of how best to deal with the strong light of this desert environment throughout the year. Now, I do wear several hats, as was said, and I'm not going to wear the hat of the historian so much, nor that of the critic, but rather the person who sees architecture, who reacts to it through images, and as the painter who pursues abstraction. And in fact, I'm deeply concerned with light in my own work. As it happens, Abstraction and Light, a meditation on the Alhambra, I had the extraordinary opportunity, really one of the greatest events in my life, to have a retrospective exhibition of my work as painter, draftsman, and photographer in the Palace of Charles V in the Alhambra 3 years ago. You can't imagine what it means to do that. So I'm going to weave the story partly around that exhibition, partly around the Alhambra, partly around my way of seeing, and it'll be a lot about images. Sometimes the images will pass very quickly, sometimes more slowly. So that's my title, Abstraction and Light, a meditation on the Alhambra, a detail of one of my paintings, Mirror of the Imagination. I'm here to remind you of what we're talking about, the Alhambra. This is actually a photograph I took 30 years ago in winter. It's what I call my Washington Irving photograph. The epic, the romantic aspect of the Alhambra, looking from the Tenerife across to the main part of the Alhambra. I've photographed this building over the years in many conditions, including in deepest winter. And throughout the year, throughout the day, the whole place is changing constantly in reaction to light. So this is the title of that exhibition, the catalogue itself, a fabulous book. I was very lucky with my collaborators. The person who helped me do the installation, which I'll come on to in a minute, was Juan Domingo Santos, a wonderful Spanish architect who grew up in the Alhambra, and is a fine architect, but also someone with an amazing understanding of how you place things in the context of the Alhambra. And then his counterpart, his mate, Carmen Moreno Alvarez, who designed an exquisite catalogue, which gives me pleasure every day. Now, it's rare that authors can turn to a book and say, I'm so pleased with it. So for me, this was a chance to explore a place which already meant a great deal to me. Many of you would probably think of the Alhambra as being in the south of something, the south of Europe. I think of it as being in the north of something, the north of the world of Islam as it crosses Africa. In my own experiences, I knew Morocco in some real depth and detail before I first went to Andalusia. It is, of course, an extension of the invasion into Spain of the Muslims, and has a very complex history of different occupations on the extraordinary upper terrain, which you can see in that photograph. It's broken into pieces. It's a palimpsest. In the middle, you can see the palace of Charles V, banged into the edge of the nursery palaces, a firm assertion of the new order, Christianity, when the Muslims were kicked out. And yet part of the richness of this is a collage. let's say, differentiation of different pieces. I first got really engaged in this in 1912. In 1909, there had been a wonderful meeting of a literary festival, the Hague Literary Festival, which normally meets in Wales. But for once they put it in Spain, and I don't know who said, we'd like to invite William Curtis to introduce the whole thing with some sort of reflection on the Alhambra. So I wrote a piece, Une méditation sur l'Alhambra, meditation on the Alhambra, read it out. People were extremely moved by it, which was very nice. And I was thinking of it also as a way of saying the Alhambra inspires every generation in a different way. It's one of those magnetic works that is read in totally contrasting ways through the centuries. Whether it's the exoticism of the 19th century, or whether it's Owen Jones and his study of the ornament, or Luis Barragan, the great Mexican architect, deeply influenced by it through a certain kind of abstraction. So it's one of those works which has this power to inspire. Now, my own, let's say, lens is that of abstraction. This is one of many of my paintings. This is called simply Revelation. It gives you an idea also of my, let's say, interest in inner light and in black light in painting. I did not go into the Alhambra thinking, I'm now going to be inspired by the Alhambra. I was already inspired by it. Rather, I created a parallel text through paintings, which had an extraordinary resonance that I could never have anticipated with certain qualities of the architecture of the Nasrid palaces, and particularly the qualities to do with light, shadow, evanescence, revelation, and other such themes. Abstraction runs through all that I do. Photographs, we'll come back to this later. Black and white photographs, which I call cosmologies. This is one of the examples. Photographs dealing with light and the history of architecture. This is Le Corbusier, one of my teachers when it comes to the problem of light and architecture. The monastery of Tourette in the 1950s. And if we go back 2 millennia, we are reminded that light is one of the permanent parts of architecture, that every work of architecture is free to use or not use light. We do not know what light looks like. It's invisible. We know it by its secondary effects. Architecture needs light to be visible. But I would say that light needs architecture to have a shape, a form, a significance. They interact, they energize. The Pantheon in Rome, you see here, is of course a microcosm of the imperial power. You can discuss that building in terms of the classical language of architecture. But one of the things that makes it so powerful is, of course, the ray of light that descends and moves around, reminding us of the relation of microcosm and macrocosm. So, in my travels in the history of architecture over the years, I often find myself reacting to extremely powerful moments of illumination, let's say. This is Saqqara in the entrance to the pyramid complex 5,000 years ago. Light is a universal issue of architecture. Every generation has to think about it. And I found it quite touching going into the studios today to discover what's the first year studio all about? Studying light. Bravo. Models thinking about how light goes around in the course of the day. I thought, well, I don't need to tell them anything. They know everything already. Well, we'll see. So, light as something related to the divine. This is the Jacobin in Toulouse, where I live, 14th century. Winter light. I'm extremely sensitive to the angle of light. Winter pleases me very much because it's low, it creates shadows, the modeling. And then, of course, the Alhambra, which I photographed in all kinds of ways. My photographs are abstractions. They're almost like paintings. A good photograph for me is a filter between the inner world, the imagination, the feeling, the subconscious, and the outer world of the thing you're looking at. Why is it that you react to this rather than that? It's because something is responding. If the photograph responds to that with immediacy, you have got an opportunity to create a remarkable photograph. But it must be absolutely tight, so you can not add or take away. So this is the ambiguity for me in photography. It has to have that sense of immediacy, but at the same time, it must be incredibly structured, composed. And composed is not the right word, because it's not fully conscious how this happens. So I have photographed the Alhambra in many conditions, many seasons, exploring, of course, the mirror effects of water. This is looking along the, you see there, is this got a pointer here? I guess it does. I don't know. But anyway, you can see the vertical there of the courtyard of the myrtles, and then the cross-axis of the patio of the rounds. This is looking straight down. The previous photograph down the court of the myrtles. We'll be coming back to it. So the exhibition was in the Renaissance building. This is the Palace of Charles V. Itself a remarkable work of Renaissance architecture, highly complex in its thinking, very powerful in its form, the central courtyard. And branching off from it, in fact I'll go back a second, because you can see it, Palacio de Carlos on the bottom left, and then you see a polygonal piece attached to it. That is the chapel into which I inserted the yeah, okay, we're in business. So, this is the myrtles, this is the lions, this is the palace, and here is the round cortile, and then at an angle we go into this space here. So my exhibition is in this chapel, in the space to one side, and then in another space, 1.5 stories high, where images were projected in a moving montage. I'll come back to that in a moment. So there's the cortile, and then you enter the polygonal chapel, and this is how we did it. There were 126 paintings in this whole exhibition. And you see, I don't use frames. I don't like frames. I hate frames. They're killers. The frame should be the space. It's the context. That's the way to make it live, so that the thing on the wall is living with the space in front and behind, the illusion of space and the actual space in front, like a sculpture. So what we did is attached the paintings, which are about 85 centimeters high, around the walls, but with a bracket separating them 4 centimeters, so they're hovering. In all my notes, back and forth, the emails sent at 3 in the morning to my friend Juan, when he's still up and about in Spanish, I said flotante. Everything has to be floating. We're after things that suspend, that float. All the details were worked out, so everything felt a little bit in suspension. Then there was the invention of the lower vitrine, the lower glass cases. I was a bit concerned about the great height of this space. Would we be crushed by this space? And I thought, if we have something which I do anyway, I show smaller pieces on horizontal tables, rather like manuscript that you can look at. If we do that in the right way, we can break something of that height and establish a relationship between the human figure, the pieces in the foreground, and the ones in the back. It worked perfectly. So this was done with these 4 cases, 4 meters 40 long, 85 centimeters high, with tables which have no support visibly, so they're floating on shadows. And then the pieces laid out on this white surface, which was done with white paint with dust, creating a slight texture. And then even those pieces, those paintings, are lifted 3 millimeters off that surface, being very precise. And what we did is we had this molino, windmill effect, which picked up the different axes and directions as you moved around. So there was a dynamic relation with the space. And sure enough, people came in and walked around in different circuits. We investigated all this in drawings. At that stage, we hadn't pushed the cases close together. We were waiting to do that. This is the kind of depth and detail into which we went. How would people perceive these things moving through space? So it was an exhibition that, in a way, you could call it an installation, because it was trying to bring alive this rather stark religious space, which has nothing left in it. And I think that really came off. Of course, there are sotto voce references to water tanks, to transparency, to axes, to the sense of mystery of the water bodies of the Alhambra next door. Foregrounds and backgrounds, changes of scale, reading something here, seeing it in the distance, moving around. And then the pieces on the wall. This gives you some feeling for what they look like. I don't really think of these as paintings in the normal sense of the word. I think of them as objects for meditation. I call them mental landscapes. They really are palpably textured. They change as you move around. There's relief, there's reflection. People would visit them, look at them at different angles. The light changes. So again, I don't want to trap them too much. I want them to breathe. This gives you an idea of the kind of exploration. Painting on the left, Abstraction and Light, actually, the title, around the theme of black light, which is it's a little mystical, and on the right, Shadows of the Moon. Many of them have, vaguely cosmic titles. I don't start out with a title and do a painting. I do a painting that feels right, and I don't know, maybe days later, I come up with some poetic intuition that's a parallelism or a correspondence. So the titles, I think, work in that sense. There are many media. I use thick card, almost dense. I use industrial paints. I use gold. I use whatever's at hand. I use stains. I use rouge de noir, what do you call it? Nut stain liquids that Soulage used, for example, in the 50s. I use sometimes whatever's at hand. I cut them. Sometimes when the painting is going badly, I throw it in the rain for 3 days and then bring it in again, and then you know what to do. Some of these paintings take months and months. They're disciplined like the piano. Others take 3 hours. The two need each other. You can't do the one that's totally free without a constant discipline of self-criticism, of going over one which is not quite making it. I'm sure any architect knows these things, any piano player knows these things. To achieve that kind of freedom, you need tremendous discipline and self-criticism. So my place in France is like a laboratory with these things lying around all over the place, on terraces, take them out, bring them in. It's a process, it's a space. So this gives you a little more idea of the rotation, the kind of pieces, silver plate, mirror of the imagination. You could surmise that I'm interested, of course, in the history of abstract painting in the 20th century, but not just. I'm interested in abstraction in general. Who are my heroes? Well, Jackson Pollock, for most of Pollock's life, especially 1949. Picasso around 1911. One has one's internal dialogues with the past, one's conversation with key works, which in print, you go around, you rethink them, and they're with you. To me, a good painting has to communicate before it's understood. It's not a rational thing, it's a seduction at a pre-conscious level. And then that's what happens when a piece like that is read horizontally as a foreground to things in the background. It's me, happy man at the opening. It was a wonderful thing. And then this is the setup. There are a lot of people who work with you to make this happen. Like a building, you have to have good contractors. I had very good contractors, all well orchestrated by my friend of mine. Pieces of glass 4 meters and 40 long, double thick, but non-reflecting from above. It's quite something. So when you're looking down, there's no distortion at all, and no reflection of the light, which is actually 10 meters above you. And from an angle, something very slightly aqueous, very slightly green, which was just what we wanted. Water, water's everywhere. Then the section, you see how high the chapel is, with on the left, the secondary room. At that period, we were hanging them on strings, which is a device I used in Finland to show in the Museum of Finnish Architecture, using fishing cords and having them floating in space. But we decided that was too complicated for this particular space and reverted to the idea of putting them on the wall. I'll show you what that does in a minute. And then on the right-hand side, the other space that you can see there. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So here's the big chapel, polygonal. Look at the scale of this. It's very low down. And then here, the other space, which eventually we organized with the same system there. And here, stepping down into the dark room with the projections on the wall. So I'll come back to that issue in a moment. So it was a kind of multimedia show, you could say. Smaller pieces, watercolors. These are classic watercolors on watercolor paper. Water is a surface for meditation on the left, and then energies of the horizon on the right. And then the second room, where again horizontal tables are very crucial in arrangement, with the foreground and the background. Close up of two small pieces, cycles of the moon on the left, and strata on the right. One on the right is done with wax. We use wax quite a bit. Wax is wonderful because it's liquid, but it also solidifies, and then you can scrape it. It has a wonderful softness that it gives to the paper. Sometimes I use overlays and overlays of wax wash on an absorbent paper. So it becomes almost like leather. It's a view looking the other way. Configuration, as you can see, deliberate layout. We deliberately made quiet references to the axes in the rooms by placing key pieces on the axes, pieces as focus for focus. This one, for example, cosmos, the invention of light, the invention of the world, done with lots of industrial paint. And a little story, because this show had 1,000 people there, who went in there. And they had these wonderful young people dressed in black, like waiters, you know, young men and young ladies, very elegant. And they would always ask you, where do you come from? And they would note it down. And so, excuse me, oh, I'm from England. Oh, okay, so, Sevilla, okay, fine. Where do you come from? Russia, okay, fine. Guy goes and runs around in 10 seconds and rushes out in panic, okay. And then others would linger for hours. And one day I noticed two very elegant gentlemen, who I guessed were from North Africa, speaking Arabic and in French, and going over the whole thing in great detail. So I was like a spy to see what they're saying. So I get next to them and edging up, overhearing what they're saying. And I said, comment est-ce que vous voyez tout ça? How do you say all that? Ça me plaît beaucoup. This pleases us very, very much. Really? Why does it please you very much? He said, Monsieur, nous sommes des musulmans. We're Muslims. And we're here because we're involved in the restoration of the Mosque of Tinmar in the High Atlas, and the people in the Alhambra work restoring buildings. We love the Nasri palaces. We love everything about this place. These paintings are in synchronization. These paintings are in harmony with that world next door. And then they say, ici, tout est cosmologie. Everything is cosmology here. I said, oui, merci beaucoup. You're the artist. I said, yeah, thank you. You know, abstract art for me is an art of distillation, an art of mystery, an art of the hermetic, an art of multiple meanings. It's nothing to do with formalism. When I was a student in Harvard in the early 50s, listening to the Michael Frieds of this world, formalism, I said, you poor people are so lost, you don't have a clue what you're talking about. I was delving into Pollock, delving into the deeper meanings of those works. And so for me, the forebears are there in 20th century art. One moves on from one's debts into one's own space. But for me, abstraction is something extremely evocative. It never fully spells out its name. And so you can say they have references to the wrong word, but resonances with nature, with light, with water, without being any of those things, and while being all of those things. And then people poured in. It was like a theatre, school children, people from all over the place, chattering, moving out, coming in. It was fabulous, And groups came up from different parts of Spain to see it. Here we are, happy man at the opening. Then, okay, another aspect. In the dark room, which I'm coming back to in a minute, we had touch screens with my sketches. This on the left, or this here which you're seeing, is a table in the place I used to live in a 12th century farm in the Ardèche, in the middle of nowhere in southern France. It's a table which was like an altar. What do you see? You see fossils, you see an old photograph, actually from the 19th century, of the pyramids. You see a sketch of the Sphinx by Le Corbusier. You see the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, another, the Sphinx, and then in the foreground, a sketch of an Indian temple, temple at Guerrero, 11th century. I spent a long time in India. And then in the middle, two fragments which look like each other. One is nature, it's a fossil. The other is it's a fragment of an Indian temple. Now that vibration is where I am, somewhere between nature and the history, somewhere between the man-made and the power of nature. So this is an alchemist table, let's put it that way. So over the years, I sketch. And sketching to me is a way of grasping what's out there. To draw is to draw upon. I encourage all students to sketch. Less mobile phones, more looking, more analyzing, more trying to penetrate what's out there. Because if you do it that way, you retain it. It goes in your mind, it becomes part of your inner world, if you like, as an architect. So I travel the world always with sketchbooks. There are 123 now. I'm wanting to do a big exhibition, actually, these drawings. And maybe there's an opportunity, actually, in a museum of antiquities in Reggio di Calabria, along with the bronzes. There's a great interest in doing something. I want to do an exhibition called The Poetry of Ruins. Do you recognize it? Maybe not. It's Pueblo Bonito. I have many, many sketches of the Southwest. So we were talking about 1984, but I had other Southwests, which were the Southwests of antiquity before being involved in modern architecture here. The first, second, and third mesas, Wild Peak, the Canyon de Chelly, all those things are part of my anchoring in this continent, in the United States. I had great difficulty always when I lived in the States about the lack of an ancient history, so I was drawn to the Southwest. It was just automatic, just as I was drawn to Mexico. So the sketch is something which observes, it tremors, it holds, but it almost becomes abstract. This is a fragment of a ruin, Ostia Antica, sketch of 1996. Drawing of a mud building or a mud fortress in southern Morocco on the left, a wall in Colombia, in Cartagena de Indias, where the drawing takes on a life of its own. Or profiles of theatres that are Delphi. And then these turn into other things. Palenque on the left, the garden on the right. That's me, age 3. Look at those steps. I grew up next to Frank Lloyd Wright even before knowing him. You know, I knew Falling Water at age 3. I knew Le Corbusier's Domino at age 3. My father was a concrete engineer. And, I think in a kind of homage to his profession, the architect who designed this wonderful house that I grew up in had these things in it. It's a pool. It's on a cross-axis of a formal garden. It had levels. I think I've been rediscovering that infant's paradise all my life, including in the Alhambra. Anyway, it's just an autobiographical note. My own garden in France, this is my own creation, more than 30 years, is actually a resume of years of travels, ruins, transformations, and echoes. And then stratification, miniaturization, the clouds of Monte Albano turning into glyphs, turning into abstractions, clouds, and then into paintings. So you see the observation of the world and the creation of abstract works of art is, in my case, linked. I'm a historian who looks, who uses his eyes, who reacts. Of course, I write books which analyze the why, the wherefore, reconstruct, use documents. But there's another level going on, which is, let's say, to do with direct intuition. Paintings often with stratification. This is Memories of Venice, small wax watercolor painting. Detail of liquid forms of the imagination. And then this is what I see out my window at home, the River Lot in France. My worlds are all interconnected. And that's what I see when I work. I look out of the window towards the garden. And then, you know, these drawings and paintings have had several earlier exhibitions. I'm concentrating deliberately on the calligraphic on the smaller scale. All of these were inserted in these small touch tables in the third room. Dance in landscape, another theme, and snake dance at Welpy. These are all pieces of paper or card. This is Welpy, which you know Welpy. Now, I've never seen a snake dance, but I know Edward Curtis's photographs of snake dancing. And I saw them, 40 years ago when I was a student and was bowled over by them. So some of these things are evocations of place, of memory, of revelation, dance theme. And then there are the pieces which are very recent, large paintings. This is actually another investigation. These are in a wonderful building by Aranda Pigem-Villalta, who won the Pritzker Prize last year, the restaurant Marquis in plastic. And recently I was there and we put these paintings in there. They had a very happy relationship. This is a new series, only months old. Right, now, so this gives you an idea, I think, of a way of seeing, of the basics of that exhibition, and of a certain way of looking at the Alhambra, which I'll come back to in a minute. In the chapel, there was a niche with an introductory video, about 9 minutes long, called Abstraction and Light, which explains the whole thing. So with your permission, I'll just play that video and then come back to the rest of the lecture. And it gives you an idea of how we've been using several media for a general public to come in, paintings all around, but then this, let's say, evocative video. But I want to carry on with the very subject of photography and how I use it in different ways, including in books. As a historian, of course, I write texts. But to me, photographs are a way of revealing other dimensions in a work. This is the second edition of my book on local museum. It came out 3 years ago, where photographs play a tremendously important part, either ones in black and white, color, to evoke different qualities, or things that Corbusier looked at, looking at buildings in a fresh way that everybody thinks they know. Over Savoie Crossy, these were taken on a wonderful June day in 2009. Very strong abstract pictures as part owners. Photographs taken at different times. These are Shangri-La in India. And of course, photographs that deal very much with light. Ronchamp, the interior chapel, or La Tourette, almost an abstract painting, the Ondulatoire in the cloister. But I'm interested in night light as well. This is Macintosh in midwinter, the School of Art in Glasgow. For me, photographs are ways of exploring the, let's say, invisible qualities of works of architecture, the presences, the atmospheres. They're not literal. They're trying to touch on other things in the relation between the building and the surrounding space, or even the weather. This was in mid-December, frozen fog floating across, marvelous, and I took a whole series of which this is one which to me captured the sort of Nordic sensibility of Macintosh. Balagan, himself a great abstract artist, photographed several years ago. I had an exhibition of my photos on Balagan 6 years ago. Water, the Madrasa Ben Youssef in Marrakesh, Salt Institute, which I photograph time and time again, go back to it. And then, teasing images like this of salt is light and absence of shadow, or shadow and absence of light. So over the years, I've had several exhibitions of photographs, and including very much so the black and whites. Black and white, to me, are a world of their own. These are, of course, taken 15 or 20 years ago. Geology, water, landscape, volcanic landscapes and their reaction to light. This is the Canary Islands, which becomes almost a Chinese ink painting in such a photograph. Often there's a very high horizon, flattening effect, dissolution of one matter into another. So one tries to convey different features of geology, of time, of the erosion of landscape. This is in the Aldesh, where I first went as an 11-year-old boy, swam in this river know it very well. But where does the water begin and the solid end? What's transparent? What's reflection? In the end, it's almost like an abstract painting. I don't set out to make photos like abstract paintings, they just come out that way. Equally, the photographs I do, as a historian of art, have a stockhouse of images from the history of art, and I find them recreating Renaissance perspectives without intending to, or Lisitsky's abstract relations without intending to, or Mondrian without intending to, or Rothko without intending to. They're just things that are part of one's sensibility. Although in my case, they're of course blended into my own activity as an artist. I'm interested in the power of light to transform. There's a whole series of horizon studies, for example, which investigate the horizon as a line, an edge, as something luminous or revelatory. This is on a boat between La Guerrero and Guerrero in the Canary Islands. So back to the Alhambra and the way that I looked at it, because it was a photographic campaign, which was then transformed into another video. I don't know whether we dare, but I'll go quickly through these stills. This is me photographing it. Do you know those films of Orson Welles in Spain? This is a wink to those films when he's wandering around with a hat. My friends who made the videos were wonderful, Transversal, the company, Paco and Carmen Sigla. They said, you must be in that introductory video. I said, I don't want to be present. They said, but you are present, So that's why we inserted that thing. I said, it's fine, as long as you can't see my face very much. My shadow, that's fine. And maybe my hat. So I had to get a hat that was worthy of the occasion. And I had not on that occasion gone to Granada. I have 53 sombreros. So I actually went from one end of Granada to the other to try and find a hat that was not made in China. And I found one in a rope shop that specialized in everything made with cord. Beautiful handmade sombrero. And that's what I'm wearing on this occasion. The relation between vegetation and architecture, gardens, of course, endlessly reflections, as that video was showing, which unfortunately you couldn't hear what it was saying. The stillness of it all, the stillness of the shadows. This is June, very, very strong light. October, reflections. Mirrors of the imagination. I was a student in the history of art at Harvard a long time ago. And one of my friends, actually, was Oleg Rabba, who wrote a very incisive book about the Alhambra in the late 1978, as far as I remember. Oleg was somebody very interested in meaning and in political expression in architecture, and those are the aspects of the Alhambra that he explored. I said, Oleg, it's a marvelous book, but where's the architecture? Where's the pleasure? Where's the sensation? He said, that's not my business. I said, that's fine, you do what you do. So is this somewhere at a long distance, my answer to Oleg, to say architecture speaks by its own means. Architecture, in this case, speaks through water, light, transformation, reinforces possibly the iconographic features. Actually, with architecture, we should do everything. We should handle all the levels to understand it properly. Reflections, this is June, very strong light. Swallows and shadows. Winter, the light bouncing off. The baths, shadow, pool. The apartments. The mashrabiyah, the shades. The wonderful chambers each side of the patio of the grounds. Patio of the grounds in winter light. Endless effects of light changing more material. And then photographing plants, which is not so easy actually. And most photographs of plants are banal. I have photographs of more abstract paintings. These calligraphic shadows. walls, liquid, the Patel Palace in winter, hypnosis of reflections. My partner in arms, Catherine, me. We always, in my books, I'm always there. You know, Hitchcock's films, he's always there as a waiter. I'm always somewhere in my books, and so is she. And then the agitation of the water left underneath it. And then winter in the Patel, when it's cold again. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.